Okay, so you want to host the World Cup. 32 national teams, 5 billion television viewers, the entire planet watching your country for a full month. Sounds like the greatest marketing campaign in human history. And honestly, it kind of is. But hosting the World Cup costs more than most countries spend on their entire military in a year, and the hosts who actually make money from it, they don't win because of the tournament. They win because of what they already had before the opening ceremony. So what does it actually cost to host one of these things? FIFA sets the baseline requirements before a country even wins the bid. You need at least 8 stadiums, each seating 60,000 people or more. You need airports that can absorb enormous international traffic spikes. You need hotels, roads, rail, telecoms, and a full national security apparatus. Brazil spent roughly $15 billion total preparing for 2014. Russia came in at around $14 billion for 2018. Qatar spent approximately $220 billion for 2022. Yes, $220 billion for 2022. For context, that is roughly the entire GDP of New Zealand, spent on 64 football matches. To be fair to Qatar, they were starting from almost nothing. They built 8 brand new stadiums from scratch in the desert. They constructed an entire new city called Lusail. They installed a national metro system that simply didn't exist before. They even air-conditioned outdoor stadiums in 40-degree heat. 40-degree heat. In open air. With air conditioning, most countries don't come close to that level of build-out. The United States, hosting in 2026 alongside Canada and Mexico, expects to spend around $11 billion in total. But $11 billion is still $11 billion. And that money comes out of government budgets, which means taxpayers. And that's before the overruns even start. Okay, so how does a host country actually make money from this? Here's the first thing you need to understand. FIFA keeps almost all of the commercial revenue, the broadcast rights, the global sponsorships, the merchandise licensing. FIFA's total revenue from the 2022 Qatar World Cup was around $7.5 billion. The host country received none of that directly. What the host gets is something different: indirect money, tourism, spending, sustained global attention. Around 1.5 million foreign visitors typically attend a World Cup, each one spending roughly $3,000 to $5,000 during their stay. That adds up to somewhere between $4 and $7 billion in direct tourist spending. On top of that, every local business sees a surge. Hotels, restaurants, transport companies, retail, all running at capacity for a month straight. Then there's the broadcast exposure. Billions of dollars in effectively free advertising for your country as a destination. And the downstream trade and investment interest that follows the global spotlight. Germany hosted in 2006 and credited the tournament with fundamentally changing how the world saw them. They called it the summer fairy tale. Tourism to Germany climbed noticeably in the years that followed. South Korea and Japan co-hosted in 2002 and both saw lasting boosts to their international brand and inbound tourism. South Africa in 2010 became the first African nation to host. The tournament put South Africa on the global tourism map in a way that no advertising campaign could have bought at any price. So here is the actual revenue model in plain terms. You spend big to build the infrastructure. Then you capture the economic activity that flows around the event, not the event revenue itself. Think of it like hosting a massive stadium concert in your city. The artist keeps the ticket money, but every hotel, restaurant, and taxi driver in a 10-mile radius has their single best month of the entire year. And what's the stuff nobody actually warns you about? The white elephant problem. A white elephant is an asset that costs more to maintain than it earns. Stadiums that cost hundreds of millions to build become expensive, empty concrete bowls the moment the final whistle blows. Brazil's Arena Amazonia in Manaus cost over $270 million to construct. It hosted exactly 4 World Cup matches. After the tournament, the local football club using it had average attendances of around 2,000 people, in a stadium designed to hold 44,000. The operating costs, security, cleaning, maintenance, power, run into millions per year whether anyone is sitting in those seats or not. Qatar has the same problem multiplied by 8 entire stadiums. Some are already being partially dismantled. One was designed from the beginning to be disassembled and donated to developing nations, but most will require ongoing government subsidies for the next several decades. Then there are the construction cost overruns. They are essentially guaranteed on any World Cup project. Brazil's original stadium budget was around $3 billion. The final cost came in at over 3.5 times that. Russia budgeted $10 billion for 2018 infrastructure. It came in more than 30% above estimate. Security alone for a modern World Cup runs into the billions of dollars. Brazil deployed 85,000 security personnel across 12 host cities. The 2026 United States tournament is expected to be the largest security operation in American sports history. And then there's the displacement problem. Stadiums and roads require land, and that land is almost always already occupied. Brazil evicted an estimated 200,000 people to clear space for construction projects. That creates legal costs, protests, reputational damage, and long-term political fallout. None of those numbers appear in the official budget line. So who's actually done this well? Germany 2006 is the gold standard for modern World Cup hosting economics. They spent around $4.3 billion total, modest by current standards. They lean heavily on existing infrastructure rather than building new venues from scratch. 12 existing stadiums were upgraded instead of 12 new ones being constructed. Direct tourist revenue during the tournament hit around $2 billion. And the long-run trade and brand benefit was estimated by the German government at tens of billions over the following decade. Germany came as close to a genuine financial win as any host in modern history. France 1998 is another widely cited example of getting it right. The Stade de France cost around $400 million to build. It became the permanent home of both the national football and rugby teams. It still hosts major events nearly 30 years later. That is how you amortize a stadium cost over a real useful life, instead of writing it off as a one-time event expense. South Africa 2010 spent $3 to $4 billion on preparation. Tourism the following year jumped by over 15%. The country attracted roughly $11 billion in foreign investment in the 2 years after the tournament. South Africa's own economists credited the World Cup with materially accelerating the country's international trade and business relationships. The United States is arguably the most commercially interesting host in recent history. The 2026 tournament will use 16 existing NFL and MLS stadiums. Almost no new construction required. The country already has the hotels, airports, highways, and transit infrastructure. FIFA projects the 2026 tournament will generate over $11 billion in economic activity across the 3 host countries, and the U.S. tourism industry, already the largest and most developed on Earth, is positioned to capture an outsized share of that number. So how do people lose their shirt on this? The trap is building infrastructure you don't actually need for a future that never arrives. Brazil is the clearest modern example of how badly this can go. They built brand new stadiums in cities with no real football culture. Cuiabá, Manaus, Natal, cities that were never going to fill those 40,000-seat venues ever again. The government bet that hosting would kickstart lasting economic development in struggling regions. It didn't. The stadiums sit mostly empty. The debt sits fully present. The Economist estimated Brazil's net economic loss from the 2014 World Cup at over $3 billion. The failure pattern is almost always the same. A country overbids to win the hosting rights, overpromises to its own government and public to justify the expense, then overbuilds in locations that simply cannot support those venues after the final whistle blows. Qatar spent $220 billion to stage 64 matches. That is roughly $3.4 billion per game. Even with unlimited sovereign oil wealth, that is an extraordinary figure for a country of 3 million people. Qatar's calculation was never really about football economics or tourism receipts. It was a geopolitical play, buying global legitimacy, visibility, and soft power on the world stage. And by that specific measure, it arguably worked. They are a household name on every continent now. But the stadiums will cost them for the next 30 years. Okay, so what can a host country realistically walk away with? Let's run the math on 2 scenarios. Scenario 1. You're a developing country building from limited existing infrastructure. You construct new stadiums and transport networks to FIFA specifications. Total spend, $8 to $15 billion. Direct tourist spending during the tournament, $4 to $6 billion. Ongoing stadium operating costs over 30 years, $1 to $3 billion total. Net result, before trade effects, -2 to -5 billion. If the downstream investment and trade effects materialize, as they did in South Africa, you might break even over a decade. If they don't, as in Brazil, you are left holding a very expensive set of concrete bowls. Scenario 2. You're a developed country with existing infrastructure already in place. Germany, France, the United States. You spend $3 to $5 billion on upgrades, logistics, and security. Tourist revenue during the tournament month, $5 to $8 billion. Downstream tourism growth over the following 3 years, $2 to $4 billion more. Post-tournament stadium costs, manageable because the venues already have year-round tenants. Net result, genuinely positive, potentially by several $billions before you count the brand and soft power value at all. The 2026 US tournament alone is projected to generate around $5 billion in direct economic output for the United States. With essentially no new construction spend, the profit math is more favorable than any World Cup in modern history. Here is the honest answer about what hosting the World Cup actually is. It is not a tourism business in the conventional sense. It is not a stadium business. It is a brand and geopolitical platform with a very large tourism side effect attached. The countries that treat it as a construction project almost always lose. The countries that treat it as a platform for something they were already building, they win. Germany didn't profit from the World Cup because they hosted it. They profited because they were already a world-class destination, and the World Cup reminded 5 billion people of that fact at exactly the same moment. The ball is round. The math is not.